Welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory. If you've never been here before, you're on the Varietal Literature YouTube page. Varietal Literature is a group of published writers from Vancouver who just like to have fun with narrative. Some of it's here on YouTube and some of it's on our website at varietal-literature.ca, where you can see experimental fiction, poetry, or just straightforward short stories. As far as what we do on the channel, we sometimes read those things live. Sometimes we write stories live. That's what we tend to do on Thursdays around this time. But what we're going to do today, and what we've been doing on Tuesdays for about a year now, is we're going to read old classic folk and fairy tales from around the world. And this is kind of a chill stream. So it's made for you just kind of got home and you want to lie down, or you got to go and make dinner. There isn't anything too visually significant going on, so if you just want to listen, it works that way too. Also, if you've never been here before and you're not watching this live, down in the description there will be timestamps to jump you to the different stories that we're going to read. And today we are going to read a few different stories. We'll sort of see how time goes. However, at the very least, we are going to read East of the Sun and West of the Moon, which is the name of the book we're going to read from. But it is actually a specific tale in this book. This book has a little more significance than some of the ones we've read. I see Holly's House and GS are in the chat. Hello. And in that, there's just more fame around it. One such thing is that it is illustrated by Kay Nielsen, who is a significant illustrator in the history of illustrations. It's put together by two fellows with Nordic names. I'm afraid I'm going to do violence too, but at least one is Asbjornsen, and the other is slipping my mind at the moment. But we're going to read East of the Sun and West of the Moon, which is a traditional tale that will remind you of a tale that is a fairy tale far more famous. But I always like to let people guess which one that's going to be when they hear it. But what I will say is this almost certainly predates that and is more likely an inspiration for it, if it has any relationship at all. East of the Sun and West of the Moon is going to take up the first half. And then we're going to look at some short ones. And when I say short, some are like a page long. And then we're going to look at one more story about a Lindworm, which is a kind of snake, kind of dragon creature in Nordic lore. Because most of this is northern lore, specifically around Norway and Sweden. Holly's House says Kay Nielsen is one of my favorite illustrators of all times. Yeah, I can see why. It really stood out for me. The illustrations when I was reading it. Okay. Well, there's no reason for me to blibber blab your ear off anymore. That's what we're up to tonight. We're going to read this story, and then we're going to read two little short ones that will take probably less than a couple of minutes to combine, and then we're going to read a story about a Lindworm. But this first one is kind of a romance, kind of a fairy tale, and just kind of a wonderful imaginative space. That means anything to you. This story is called East of the Sun and West of the Moon, and I'm reading it from a book called East of the Sun, West of the Moon, Old Tales from the North. Once on a time there was a poor husbandman who had so many children that he hadn't much of either food or clothing to give them. Pretty children they all were, but the prettiest was the youngest daughter, who was so lovely there was no end to her loveliness. So one day, 'twas on a Thursday evening at the fall of the year, the weather was so wild and rough outside, it was so cruelly dark, and rain fell and wind blew, till the walls of the cottage shook again. There they all sat round the fire, busy with this thing and that. But just then, all at once, something gave 3 taps on the window pane. Then the father went out to see what was the matter, and when he got out of doors, what should he see but a great big white bear? Good evening to you, said the white bear. The same to you, said the man. Will you give me your youngest daughter? If you will, I'll make you as rich as you are now poor, said the bear. Well, the man would not be at all sorry to be so rich, but still he thought he must have a bit of a talk with his daughter first. So he went in and told them how there was a great white bear waiting outside, who had given his word to make them so rich if he could only have the youngest daughter. The lassie said no, outright. Nothing could get her to say anything else, so the man went out and settled with the white bear that he should come again next Thursday evening and get an answer. Meantime, he talked his daughter over, and he kept telling her of all the riches they would get, and how well off she would be herself. And so at last she thought better of it, and washed and mended her rags, made herself as smart as she could, and was ready to start. I can't say her packing gave her much trouble. There's one of the very, very beautiful K. Nielsen illustrations. I mean, it's not too clear on here, unfortunately, but they're stunning. And there's another. Next Thursday evening came, and the white bear to fetch her, and she got upon his back with her bundle, and off they went. So when they had gone a bit of the way, the white bear said, "Are you afraid?" No, she wasn't. "Well, mind and hold tight by my shaggy coat, and then there's nothing to fear," said the bear. And she rode a long, long way till they came to a great steep hill. There on the face of it the white bear gave a knock, and a door opened, and they came into a castle where there were many rooms all lit up, rooms gleaming with silver and gold, and there too was a table ready laid, and it was all as grand could be. Then the white bear gave her a silver bell, and when she wanted anything, she was only to ring it, and she would get it at once. Well, after she, oh dear, my background went away. That's so funny. There we go. Well, after she had eaten and drunk, the evening wore on. She got sleepy after her journey and thought she would like to go to bed, so she rang the bell. And she had scarce taken hold of it before she came into a chamber where there was a bed made, and as fair and white as anyone could wish to sleep on, with silken pillows and curtains and gold fringe. All that was in the room was gold or silver, but when she'd gone to bed and put out the light, a man came and laid himself alongside her. That was the white bear, who threw off his beast shape at night, but she never saw him, for he always came after she had put out the light. And before the day dawned, she was up and off again, so things went on happily for a while. But at last she began to get silent and sorrowful, for there she went about all day alone, and she longed to go home and see her father and mother and brothers and sisters. So one day, when the white bear asked what it was she lacked, she said it was so dull and lonely there, and how she longed to go home and see her father and mother and brothers and sisters. That was why she was so sad and sorrowful, because she couldn't get to them. Well, said the bear, perhaps there is a cure for all of this. But you must promise me one thing, not to talk alone with your mother, but only when the rest are by to hear. For she'll take you by the hand and try to lead you into a room alone to talk. But you must mind and not do that, else you'll bring bad luck on both of us. So one day, Sunday, the white bear came and said, now they could set off to see her father and mother. Well, off they started, she sitting on his back, and they went far and long. At last they came to a grand house, and there her brothers and sisters were running about out of doors at play, and everything was pretty. 'Twas a joy to see. This is where your father and mother lived now, said the white bear. But don't forget what I told you, else you'll make us both unlucky. No, bless, she'd not forget. And when she had reached the house, the white bear turned right about and left her. Then, when she went in to see her father and mother, there was such joy. There was no end to it. None of them thought they could thank her enough for all she'd done for them. Now they had everything they wished, as good could be, and they all wanted to know how she got on where she lived. Well, she said it was very good to live there, where she did. She had all she wished. What she said beside, I don't know, but I don't think any of them had the right end of the stick, or that they got much out of her. But so in the afternoon, after they'd done dinner, all happened as the white bear had said. Her mother wanted to talk to her alone in the bedroom, but she minded that the white bear had said what the white bear had said, and wouldn't go upstairs. Oh, what we have to talk about we'll keep, she said, and put her mother off. But somehow or other, her mother got round her at last, and she had to tell her the whole story. So she said how every night when she had gone to bed, a man came and lay down beside her, and as soon as she had put out the light, and how she never saw him because he was always up and away before the morning dawn, and how she went about woeful and sorrowful, for she thought she would so like to see him, and how all the day long she walked about there alone, and how dull and dreary and lonesome it was. My, said her mother, it may well be a troll you slept with, but now I'll teach you a lesson, how to set eyes on him. I'll give you a bit of candle, which you can carry home in your bosom. Just light that while he's asleep, but take care not to drop the tallow on him. Yes, tallow, I mean wax, obviously. Not actual wax, but in modern terms. She's saying don't drip wax. Yes, she took the candle and hid it in her bosom, and as night drew on, the white bear came and fetched her away. But when they gone a bit of the way, the white bear asked if all hadn't happened as she had said. Well, she couldn't say it hadn't. Now mind, said he, if you have listened to your mother's advice, you've brought bad luck on us both, and then all that has passed between us will be as nothing. No, she said, she hadn't listened to her mother's advice. I don't know why she talks in the third person, by the way. Never really explained. So when she reached home and had gone to bed, it was the old story over again. There came a man, lay down beside her, but at dead of night, when she heard he slept, she got up and struck a light, lit the candle and let the light shine on him. And so she saw that he was the loveliest prince one ever set eyes on, and she fell so deep in love with him on the spot that she thought she couldn't live if she didn't give him a kiss there and then. And so she did. But as she kissed him, she dropped 3 hot drops of tallow on his shirt, and he woke up. "What have you done?" he cried. "Now you have made us both unlucky, for had you held out only this 1 year, I'd have been freed. For I have a stepmother who has bewitched me, so that I am a white bear by day and a man by night. But now all ties are snapped between us. Now I must set out from you to her. She lives in a castle that stands east of the sun and west of the moon, and there too is a princess, with a nose 3 ells long. She's the wife I must have now." Oh, hey, look, spam's back. Sorry, folks. Got some spam to get rid of. Talk amongst yourself. And I don't like having spam up for long because I don't want people to accidentally click the links. So I'm sorry for the break, but take it up with YouTube. She wept and took it ill, but there was no help for it. Go he must. Then she asked if she mightn't go with him. No, she mightn't. "Tell them the way then," she said, "and I'll search you out. That surely I may get leave to do. There is one of the many stunning illustrations in this book. Yes, she might do that, he said. But there was no way to that place. It lay east of the sun and west of the moon, and thither she'd never find her way. So next morning when she woke up, both prince and castle were gone, and then she lay on a little green patch in the midst of the gloomy thick wood, and by her side lay the same bundle of rags she'd brought with her from her old home. There she is, sad on her little mound of grass. One of my personal favorites in this. So when she rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and wept till she was tired, she set out on her way and walked many, many days, till she came to a lofty crag. Under it sat an old hag, and played with a golden apple, which she tossed about. Here the lassie asked if she knew the way to the prince, who lived with his stepmother in the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon, and who was to marry the princess with the nose 3 ells long. "How did you come to know about him?" asked the old hag. "But maybe you are the lassie who ought to have had him." Yes, she was. So it's you, is it?" said the old hag. "Well, all I know about him is that he lives in the castle that lies east of the sun and west of the moon. And thither you'll come, late or never, but still you may have the loan of my horse, and on him you can ride to my next neighbor. Maybe she'll be able to tell you, and when you get there, just give her a horse a switch under the left ear, and beg him to be off home. And stay, this golden apple you may take with you." She got upon the horse and rode a long, long time, till she came to another crag, under which sat another old hag with a gold carding comb. Here the lassie asked if she knew the way to the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon, and she answered, like the first old hag, that she knew nothing about it, except that it was east of the sun and west of the moon. "And thither you'll come, late or never, but you shall have a loan of my horse to my next neighbor. Maybe she'll tell you all about it. And when you get there, just switch the horse under the left ear and beg him off to be home." And this old hag gave her the golden carding comb. It might be she'd find some use for it, she said. So the lassie got up on the horse and rode a far, far way, and a weary time, and so at last she came to another great crag, under which sat another old hag, spinning with a golden spinning wheel. Her, too, she asked if she knew the way to the prince, and where the castle was that lay east of the sun and west of the moon. So it was the same thing over again. "Maybe it's you who ought to have the prince," said the old hag. Yes, it was. But she, too, didn't know the way better than the other two. East of the sun and west of the moon it was. She knew that was all. "And thither you'll come, late or never, but I'll lend you my horse. And then I think you'd best ride to the east wind and ask him. Maybe he knows those parts and can blow you thither. And when you get to him, you need only give the horse a switch under the left ear, and he'll trot home of himself." And so, too, she gave her the gold spinning wheel. "Maybe you'll find a use for it," said the old hag. Then on she rode many, many days, a weary time, before she got to the east wind's house. But at last she did reach it, and then she asked the east wind if he could tell her the way to the prince who dwelt east of the sun and west of the moon. Yes, the east wind had often heard tell of it, the prince and the castle, but he couldn't tell the way, for he'd never blown so far. "But if you will, I'll go with you to my brother, the west wind. Maybe maybe he knows, for he is much stronger. So if you will just get on my back, I'll carry you thither." Yes, she got on his back, and I should think they went briskly along. So when they got there, they went into the West Wind's house, and the East Wind said the lassie he had brought was the one who ought to have had the prince who lived in the castle east of the sun and west of the moon. And so she had set out to seek him, and how he had come with her, and would be glad to know if the West Wind knew how to get to the castle. "Nay," said the West Wind, "so far I've never blown. But if you will, I'll go with you to our brother, the South Wind. For he's much stronger than either of us, and he has flapped his wings so far and wide. Maybe he'll tell you you can get on my back, and I'll carry you to him." Yes, she got on his back, and so they travelled to the South Wind, and weren't so very long on the way, I should think. When they got there, the West Wind asked if they could tell her the way to the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon, for it was she who ought to have had the prince who lived there. "You don't say? That's she, isn't it?" said the South Wind. "Well, I have blustered about in most places, but so far have I never blown. But if you will, I'll take you to my brother, the North Wind. He is the oldest and strongest of the whole lot of us. And if ye don't know where it is, you'll never find anyone in the world to tell you. You can get on my back, and I'll carry you thither." Yes, she got on his back, and away she went from his house at a fine rate. And this time, too, she wasn't long on her way. So when they got to the North Wind's house, she was so wild and cross, cold puffs came from a long way off. "Blast you both! What do you want?" he roared out to them ever so far off, so that it struck them with an icy shiver. "Well," said the South Wind, "you needn't be so foul-mouthed. For here I am your brother, the South Wind, and here is the lassie who ought to have had the prince, who dwells in the castle that lies east of the sun and west of the moon, and now she wants to ask you if you were ever there, and can tell her the way, for she would be so glad to find him again." "Yes, I know well enough where it is," said the North Wind. "Once in my life I blew an aspen leaf thither, but I was so tired I couldn't blow a puff for ever so many days after. But if you really wish to go thither, and aren't afraid to come along with me, I'll take you on my back and see if I can blow you thither." Yes, with all her heart, she must and would get thither, if it were possible in any way, and as for fear, however madly he went, she wouldn't be at all afraid. Need some water. "Very well, then," said the wind. "But you must sleep here for tonight, for we must have the whole day before us, if we're to get thither at all." Early the next morning the north wind woke her, and puffed himself up and blew himself out, and made himself so stout and big 'twas gruesome to look at him. And so off they went high up through the air, as if they would never stop, till they got to the world's end. Down here, below there was such a storm, it threw down long tracts of wood and many houses, and when it swept over the great sea, the ships foundered by the hundreds. And there it is, the north wind stirring the sea in his travels. So they tore on and on. No one could believe how far they went, and all the while they still went out over the sea, and the north wind got more and more weary, and so out of breath he could scarce bring out a puff, and his wings drooped, till at last he sunk so low that the crests of the waves dashed over his heels. "Are you afraid?" said the north wind. No, she wasn't. But they weren't very far from land, and the north wind had still so much strength left in him that he managed to throw her up on shore under the windows of the castle, which lay east of the sun and west of the moon. But then she was so weak and worn out he had to stay there and rest many days before he could get home again. Next morning the lassie sat down under the castle window and began to play with the gold apple. And the first person she saw was the long nose, who was to have the prince. "What do you want for your gold apple, you lassie?" said the long nose, and threw up the window. "It's not for sale, for gold or money," said the lassie. "If it's not for sale for gold or money, what is it that you will sell it for? You may name your own price," said the princess. "Well, if I may get to the prince, he lives here, and be with him tonight, you shall have it," said the lassie whom the north wind had brought. Yes, she might. That could be done. So the princess got the gold apple, but when the lassie came up to the prince's bedroom at night, he was fast asleep. She called him and shook him, and between whiles she wept sore, but all she could do, she couldn't wake him up. Next morning, as soon as day broke, came the princess with the long nose and drove her out again. So in the daytime she sat down under the castle windows and began to card with her carding comb. And so the same thing happened. The princess asked what she wanted for it, and she said it wasn't sale for gold or money, but if she might get leave to go up to the prince and be with him that night, the princess should have it. But when she went up, she found him fast asleep again, and all she called and all she shook, wept and prayed. She couldn't get life into him. And as soon as the first gray peep of day came, then came the princess with the long nose, and she chased her out again. So in the daytime, the lassie sat down outside under the castle window and began to spin with her golden spinning wheel. And that, too, the princess with the long nose wanted to have. So she threw up the window and asked what she wanted for it. The lassie said, as she had said twice before, it wasn't for sale for gold or money, but if she might go up to the prince who was there and be with him alone for a night, she might have it. Yes, she might do that, and welcome, But now you must know there were some Christian folk who had been carried off thither, and as they sat in their room which was next the prince, they had heard how a woman had been there, and wept and prayed and called to him 2 nights running, and they told that to the prince. That evening when the princess came with her sleepy drink, the prince made as if he drank it, but threw it over his shoulder, for he could guess it was a sleepy drink. And when the lassie came in, she found the prince wide awake, and then she told him the story, how she'd come thither. "Ah," said the prince, "you've come just in the very nick of time, for tomorrow is to be our wedding day. But now I won't have the long nose, and you are the only woman in the world who can set me free. I'll say I want to see what my wife is fit for, and beg her to wash the shirt which has the 3 spots of tallow on it. She'll say yes, for she doesn't know 'tis you who put them there. But that's a work only for Christian folk, and not for such a pack of trolls. And so I'll say that I won't have any other for my bride than the woman who can wash them out, and ask you to do it." So there was great joy and love between them all that night. But next day, when the wedding was to be, the prince said, "First of all, I'd like to see what my bride is fit for." "Yes," said the stepmother with all her heart. "Well," said the prince, "I've got a fine shirt which I'd like for my wedding shirt. But somehow or other it has got 3 spots of tallow on it, which I must have washed out. And I have sworn never to take any other bride than the woman who is able to do that. If she can't, she's not worth having." Well, that was no great thing, they said, so they agreed. And she, with the long nose, began to wash away as hard as she could, but the more she rubbed and scrubbed, the bigger the spots grew. "Ah," said the old hag, her mother, "you can't just wash. Let me try." But she hadn't long taken the shirt in hand before it got far worse than ever, and with all her rubbing, wringing, and scrubbing, the spots grew bigger and blacker and darker, and uglier was the shirt. Then all the other trolls began to wash, but the longer it lasted, the blacker and uglier the shirt grew, till at last it was as black all over as if it had been up the chimney. "Ah," said the prince, "none of you are worth a straw. You can't wash. Why, there, outside, sits a beggar lassie. I'll bound she knows how to wash better than the whole lot of you. Come in, lassie," he shouted. Well, in she came. "Can you wash this shirt clean, lassie, you?" said he. "I don't know," she said, "but I think I can." Suddenly English. And almost before she had taken in and dipped it in the water, it was as white as driven snow, and whiter still. "Yes, you are the lassie for me," said the prince. At that, the old hag flew into such a rage she burst on the spot, and the princess with the long nose after her, and the whole pack of trolls after her. At least, I've never heard a word about them since. As for the prince and princess, they set free all the poor Christian folk who'd been carried off and shut up there, and they took with them all the silver and gold, and flitted away as far as they could from the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon. And that is our first story. Give me a second here. Ugh. Whoops. The camera's being a little fussy today. Sorry for the distraction. Let's just do one last thing. turn you up a bit. There we are. That's the kind of professionalism we pride ourselves on here. All right. Well, it's a little crooked, but I don't think I can do too much more with it right now. Here, just a second. I'll be right back. There we are. It would be too much to describe why I'm having a problem, but I think I've fixed it. All right. Yes, there are some good questions in the chat. GS says great windy voices. Oh, thank you. An incredible amount of air is required to make that noise. GS like the sea picture. GS says, where was she hiding this spinning wheel all this time? No kidding. I had that thought too. Like a comb and an apple are a very different prospect than like a full spinning wheel. And then Holly's House says, well, I'm going to carry OxyClean with me always in case a prince needs to marry me. And Holly says something here that I find very strange. It says as well in the story, it says, so trolls are pagan? And that I don't really understand. Like, I feel like there is an old world use of Christian being here. Not super old world, though. I don't think it's from the original tale. But the adaptation here is using Christian people, good Christian people, in a specific way that I don't really understand. And it's really like... That's why somebody with a lit degree should be doing this. I really don't know what I would have needed to search to have found out, but I had the same question myself. Because it is a strange use of it, of the word to me. I'm assuming what they're saying is people that were sort of blessed by God. In other words, humans. But who knows? Okay, so before we read the last story, let's read two short ones. The first one is called The Cat on the Dovrefell. And when I say short, these are some of the shortest things we've ever read. But they are also really interesting, and I wasn't too sure where else I could put them. So this is called The Cat on the Dovrefell. From East of the Sun and West of the Moon, Old Tales of the North. Once on a time, there was a man in Finnmark who had caught a great white bear, which he was going to take to the king of Denmark. Now it so fell out that when he came to the Dovrefell just about Christmas Eve, and there he turned into a cottage where a man lived whose name was Halvor, and asked the man if he could get the house room there for his bear and himself. Heaven never help me if what I say isn't true, said the man, but we can't give anyone house room just now, for every Christmas Eve such a pack of trolls comes down upon us, and we are forced to flit, and haven't so much as a house on our heads, to say nothing of lending one to anyone else. Oh, said the man, if that's all, you can very well lend me your house. My bear can lie under the stove yonder, and I can sleep in the side room. Well, he begged so hard that at last he got leave to stay there. So the people of the house flitted out, and before they went, everyone was got ready for the trolls. The tables were laid, and there was rice porridge, and fish boiled in lye, and sausages, and all else that was good, just as for any other grand feast. So when everything was ready, down came the trolls. Some were great and some were small. Some had long tails and some had no tails at all. Some, too, had long noses, and they ate and drank and tasted everything. Just then one of the little trolls caught sight of the white bear who laid under the stove. So he took a piece of sausage and stuck it on a fork and went and poked it up against the bear's nose, screaming out, "Posse, will you have some sausage?" Then the white bear rose up and growled and hunted the whole pack of them out of doors, both great and small. Next year Halvor was out in the wood, and on the afternoon of Christmas Eve, cutting wood before the holidays. For he thought the trolls would come again. Just as he was hard at work, he heard a voice calling out, "Halvor, Halvor!" "Well," said Halvor, "here I am." "Have you got your big cat with you still?" "Yes, that I have," said Halvor. "She's lying at home under the stove, and what's more, she's now got 7 kittens, far bigger and fiercer than she is herself." "Oh, then, we'll never come to see you again," bawled out the troll away in the wood, and he kept his word, for since that time the trolls have never eaten their Christmas brose with Halvor on the Dovrefell. That's the whole story for that one. In and out. Just fleece it out. Says nice to the or late to the party. Nice to see you mix up the background / streaming location. There's lots of lies in streaming. I am so close to where I normally stream. But yes, I'm trying to mix it up a bit. Okay, that was the cat on the Dovrefell. I'm going to read one more very short one. This one's even shorter than that. And then we will read the last story, which is weird. It's so weird. The last story is a little gross and kind of weird. In the best way, I should say. Odd might be the better way. I don't want to kind of other people's traditional tales here. It's a really unusual premise for a story by our ears. But this one's very short. Very short. It's called One's Own Children Are Always the Prettiest. It barely has a moral. There is the picture of the hunter, who is the protagonist of this very short story. A sportsman went out once into a wood to shoot, and he met a snipe. "Dear friend," said the snipe, "don't shoot any of my children." "How shall I know your children?" asked the sportsman. "What are they like?" "Oh," said the snipe, "mine are the prettiest children in all the wood." "Very well," said the sportsman. "I'll not shoot them, don't be afraid." But for all that, when he came back, he had a whole string of young snipes in his hand, which he had shot. Oh, said the snipe, "why did you shoot my children after all?" "What? These are your children?" said the sportsman. "Why, I shot the ugliest I could find, that I did." "Woe is me," said the snipe. "Don't you know that each one thinks his own children the prettiest in the world?" I mean, it's barely a story. It's almost just a joke. A very dark joke. But yeah, that's One's Own Children Are Always the Prettiest. Which is our 2 extremely short stories that buffer us over to our last story, which I think we have time for. Yeah, I think we should have time for this. Called Prince Lindworm. Now, Lindworm is really snake. But it finds some etymology in other Nordic myths as being borderline a dragon. The sort of divide between dragon and snake is a little more complex in some cultures. So like Jorgenmundr is the world snake, and I think like he's definitely a snake, but I also think that his depictions are pretty close to being dragon-like by our measure. So anyways, Lindworm is basically a snake. But I will say that it's not just a snake. It's a creature, as I understand it anyways. It's a creature of mythology. Jess says, "I think that's wonderful because it's so true." Oh, my children are the prettiest one, yeah. So this is Prince Lindworm from East of the Sun and West of the Moon, Old Tales from the North. Once upon a time, there was a fine young king who was married to the loveliest of queens. They were exceedingly happy, all but for one thing. They had no children. And this often made them both sad. Oop. Sorry, clicked the wrong thing. Lots of technical errors today. Oh, Holly's House says it's a Dune character, the Lindworm. Maybe. Dune is more pulling from Eastern mythologies, I think. Once upon a time, there was a fine young king who was married to the loveliest of queens. They were exceedingly happy, all but for one thing. They had no children. And this often made them both sad, because the queen wanted a dear little child to play with, and the king, well, he wanted an heir to the kingdom. One day, the queen went out for a walk by herself, and she met an ugly old woman. The old woman was just like a witch, but she was a nice kind of witch, not the cantankerous sort. She said, "Why do you look so doleful, you pretty lady?" "It's no use my telling you," answered the queen. "Nobody in the world can help me." "Oh, you never know," said the old woman. "Just you let me hear what your trouble is, and maybe I can put things right." "My dear woman, how can you?" said the queen, and she told her, "The king and I have no children, and that's why I am so distressed." "Well, you needn't be," said the old witch. "I can set that right in a twinkling, if only you will do exactly as I tell you. Listen, tonight, at sunset, take a little drinking cup with 2 ears, that is, handles, and put it up bottom upwards on the ground on the northwest corner of your garden. Then go and lift it up tomorrow morning at sunrise, and you will find 2 roses underneath it, one red and one white. If you eat the red rose, a little boy will be born to you. If you eat the white rose, a little girl shall be sent. But whatever you do, you mustn't eat both the roses, or you'll be sorry. That I warn you. Only one, remember that." "Thank you 1,000 times," said the queen. "This is good news indeed." And she wanted to give the old woman her gold ring, but the old woman wouldn't take it. So the queen went home and did as she'd been told, and next morning at sunrise she stole out into the garden and lifted up the little drinking cup. She was surprised, for indeed she had hardly expected to see anything, but there were the 2 roses underneath it, one red and one white. And now she was dreadfully puzzled, for she did not know which one to choose. "If I choose the red one," she thought, "and I have a little boy, he may grow up and go to wars and get killed. But if I choose the white one, I'll have a little girl, and she'll stay home for a while with us, but later on she will get married and go away and leave us. So whichever it is, we may be left with no child after all." However, at last she decided on the white rose, and she ate it. It tasted so sweet that she took and ate the red one too. I mean, who didn't see that coming? Without ever remembering the old woman's solemn warning, of course. Of course not. Sometime after this, the king went away to the wars. And while he was still away, the queen became the mother of the twins. One was a lovely baby boy, and the other was a Lindworm, or serpent. She was terribly frightened when she saw the Lindworm, but he wriggled his way out of the room, and nobody seemed to have seen him but herself, so that she thought it must have been a dream. The baby prince was so beautiful and so healthy, the queen was full of joy, and likewise, as you may suppose, was the king when he came home and found his son and heir. Not a word was said to anyone about the Lindworm, only the queen thought about it now and then. Many days and years passed by, and the baby grew up into a handsome young prince, and it was time that he got married. The king sent him off to visit foreign kingdoms in the royal coach, with 6 white horses to look for a princess grand enough to be his wife. Can I just say, every problem in a fairy tale or folk tale seems to spawn out of getting married. Just saying. Or at least finding someone to do it. But at the very first crossroads, the way was stopped by an enormous Lindworm, enough to frighten the bravest. He lay in the middle of the road with a great wide open mouth and cried, "A bride for me, before a bride for you." Then the princess made the coach turn round and try another road, but it was all no use, for at the first crossways there lay the Lindworm again, crying out, "A bride for me, before a bride for you." So the prince had to turn back home again to the castle and gave up his visits to the foreign kingdoms. And his mother, the queen, had to confess that what the Lindworm said was true, for he really was the eldest of her twins, and so he ought to have a wedding first. There seemed nothing for it but to find a bride for the Lindworm, if his younger brother, the prince, were to be married at all. So the king wrote to a distant country and asked for a princess to marry his son. Story's about to get weird. But of course, he didn't say which son, and presently a princess arrived. But she wasn't allowed to see her bridegroom until she stood by her side in the great hall and was married to her. And then, of course, it was too late for her to say she wouldn't have him. But next morning, the princess had disappeared. The Lindworm lay sleeping alone, and it was quite plain to see he had eaten her. A little while after, undeterred, the prince decided that he might now go journeying again in search of a princess, and off he drove in the royal chariot with the 6 white horses. But at the first crossway there lay the Lindworm, crying with a great wide open mouth, "A bride for me before a bride for you." So the carriage tried another road, and the same thing happened, and they had to turn back again this time, just as formerly. And the king wrote to several foreign countries to know if anyone would marry his son. At last another princess arrived, this time from a very far distant land. And of course she was not allowed to see her future husband before the wedding took place. And then, lo and behold, it was the Lindworm who stood at her side, and the next morning the princess had disappeared, and the Lindworm lay sleeping alone, and it was quite clear that he had eaten her. By and by, the prince started on his quest for the 3rd time, and at the first crossroads there lay the Lindworm with his great wide open mouth, demanding a bride as before, and the prince went straight back to the castle and told the king, "You must find another bride for my elder brother." "I don't know where I'm to find her. I've already made enemies of 2 great kings who sent their daughters here as brides, and I have no notion how I can obtain a 3rd lady. People are beginning to say strange things, I bet, and I'm sure no princess will dare to come." Now down in a little cottage near a wood, there lived the king's shepherd, an old man with his only daughter, about to get darker. And the king came one day and said to him, "Will you give me your daughter to marry my son, the Lindworm, and I will make you rich for the rest of your life?" "No, sire," said the shepherd, "that I cannot do. She is my only child, and I want her to take care of me when I am old. Besides, if the Lindworm would not spare 2 beautiful princesses, he won't spare her either. He'll just gobble her up. She is much too good for such a fate." But the king wouldn't take no for an answer, and at last the old man had to give in. There's some old world ethics for you. Well, when the old shepherd told his daughter that she was about to be Prince Lindworm's bride, she was utterly in despair. Gee, I wonder why. She went out into the woods, crying and wringing her hands and bewailing her hard fate. And while she wandered to and fro, an old witch woman suddenly appeared out of a big hollow oak tree and asked her, "Why do you look so doleful, pretty lass?" The shepherd girl said, "It's no use telling you, for nobody in the world can help me." "Oh, you never know," said the old woman. "You just let me know what your trouble is, and maybe I can put things right." "Ah, how can you?" said the girl. "For I am to be married to the king's eldest son, who is a Lindworm. He has already married 2 beautiful princesses and devoured them, and he will eat me too. No wonder I am distressed." "Well, you needn't be," said the witch woman. "All that can be set right in a twinkling, if only you'll do exactly as I tell you." So the girl said that she would. "Listen then," said the old woman. "After the marriage ceremony is over, and when it is time for you to retire to rest, you must ask to be dressed in 10 snow-white shifts. And you must then ask for a full tub of lye. That is washing water prepared with wood ashes, which, if you didn't know, water running through ashes is one way of getting lye, the traditional way of getting lye. The original soap. And a tub full of fresh milk, and as many whips as a boy can carry in his arms. And have all these brought into your bedchamber. And then, when the Lindworm tells you to shed a shift, do you bid him slough a skin." Now, in case that's too much old world English, because it's kind of key for what's coming. She's saying that when he tells you to take off one of your many cloaks you put on to get naked, you are to say back to him, "Take your skin off," because he's a snake. "And when all his skins are off, you must dip the whips in lye and whip him. Next, you must wash him in the fresh milk. And lastly, you must take him and hold him in your arms, if only for one moment." It's just very odd. It makes me giggle. The last is the worst notion, ugh, said the shepherd's daughter, and she shuddered at the thought of holding the cold, slimy, scaly Lindworm. "Do just as I've said, and all will go well," said the old woman. Then she disappeared again in the oak tree. When the wedding day arrived, the girl was fetched in the royal chariot with the 6 white horses and taken to the castle to be decked as a bride, and she asked for 10 snow-white shifts to be brought to her, and the tub of lye, and the tub of milk, and as many whips as a boy could carry in his arms. Imagine if that was your wedding day request. My God, what would people think? The ladies and the courtiers in the castle thought, of course, this was some bit of peasant superstition, all rubbish and nonsense. But the king said, "Let her have whatever she asks for." She was then arrayed in the most wonderful robes and looked the loveliest of brides. She was led to the hall where the wedding ceremony was to take place, and she saw the Lindworm for the first time as he came in and stood by her side. So they were married, and a great wedding feast was held, I bet. A banquet fit for the son of a king. There's another really gorgeous drawing. When the feast was over, the bridegroom and bride were conducted to their apartment with music and torches and a great procession, and as soon as the door was shut, the Lindworm turned to her and said, "Fair maiden, shed a shift." And the shepherd's daughter answered him, "Prince Lindworm, slough a skin." "No one has ever dared tell me to do that before," said he. "But I command you to do it now," said she. Then he began to moan and wriggle, and in a few minutes a long snakeskin lay upon the floor beside him. The girl drew off her first shift and spread it on top of the skin. Lindworm said again to her, "Fair maiden, sad a shift." The shepherd's daughter answered him, "Prince Lindworm, slough a skin." "No one has ever dared tell me to do that before." And I know what you're thinking. She literally just told him to do that. But it's a fairy tale, and they like repeated dialogue. But I command you to do it now," said she. Then with groans and moans he cast off the second skin, and she covered it with her second shift. The Lindworm said for the third time, "Fair maiden, shed a shift." The shepherd's daughter answered him again, "Prince Lindworm, slough a skin." "No one has ever dared tell me to do that before," said he, and his little eyes rolled furiously, but the girl was not afraid, and once more she commanded him to do as she bade. And so this went on until 9 Lindworm skins were lying on the floor, each of them covered with a snow-white shift, and there was nothing left of the Lindworm but a huge thick mass, which was horrible to see. Then the girl seized the whips, dipped them in lye, and whipped him as hard as ever she could. Next she bathed him all over in the fresh milk, and lastly she dragged him onto the bed and put her arms around him, and she fell fast asleep that very moment. Next morning, very early, the king and the courtiers came and peeped in through the keyhole. They wanted to know what had become of the girl, but none of them dared enter the room. However, in the end, growing bolder, they opened the door a tiny bit, and there they saw the girl, all fresh and rosy, and beside her, no Lindworm, but the handsomest prince that anyone could ever wish to see. The king ran out and fetched the queen, and after that they were such rejoicing in the castle as was never known before or since. The wedding took place all over again, much finer than the first, with festivals and banquets and merrymaking for days and weeks. No bride was ever so beloved by a king or queen as this peasant maid from the shepherd's cottage. There was no end to their love, their kindness towards her, because by her sense and her calmness and her courage she had saved their son, Prince Lindworm. Oh, there is more. That's the end of today, but I see that there is also more spam. Hey, spam. Here's what you can do. You can get reported. There's a lot of messages about this, and I'm going to read them because, my God, you guys are correct. I see some of the things so far are impressions that I had as well. I want to say right away that if there is a very real possibility that there's a symbolism going on here that is lost on me, which is what is tricky about, well, not just other cultures, but also reading from other time periods. Like might be significance to a whip and lye or to bathing in milk that I am not necessarily understanding. I mean, there must be. I will say that my core issue with the story is that when the Lindworm is handsome, everyone's fine with him. But there is no indication at all that he wasn't the same thing that ate 2 princesses. Like, there wasn't an indication that his form made him mad or anything. It seems like he's kind of a monster. And who cares if he's handsome? That seems like more of a problem. All right, so man, there's a lot. This really got chat going. I'm gonna go through some of it because I caught some of it while I was reading. So GS says they always fail to heed the ominous warnings and do indeed become very sorrowful. Yeah, like she gave you 2 instructions. You remembered the detailed one and forgot the other one. Holly's House says, do these old witch women only have the one trick or just happened upon the one person that needs it? Or do they have many spells and just hang around waiting to use them? That's a good question. So in most settings, I think it helps to remember that basically these are healers. yes, they are seen as having sort of magical properties in history, but they really are more of strange old healers in the woods. And it's worth noting that they probably did do a lot of healing, because a lot of things, even nowadays, that we deal with through medication, whatever, or medications derived from plants that they knew about, had these properties based on these kind of traditional druidic kind of healing rituals. So in a lot of ways, it's like the random nurse in the woods. But exactly like how things get treated and cured are obviously just kind of made up for the story, as far as I can tell. GS says this is a horror story. I agree. I think they try to make it happy in the end. I don't think it's a happy story. The mother doesn't listen and gives birth to a snake, a monster, who then threatens them. And then when they give it what it wants, it eats two people and continues to threaten them. Like, this is a nightmare story. Holly's House says, honestly, this sounds like most of the arranged royal marriages throughout history. Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think there's symbolic meaning in a monster who eats women. Holly's House, yeah, I thought this as well. Listen, Worm, you got a bride already. Yeah, why should we keep giving you them? Holly's House says this story was written by a bitter younger brother. I really don't know where it comes from. It might just be sort of a cultural expression of fear around how some princes just basically killed or tortured people that were forced to be married to them. Nothing suspicious about those requirements. The worm is going to think she's very kinky. These stories always hinge on the characters not going, what the heck do you need all that stuff for? Yes, they never oppose. I like how the king never asked, does the worm get his looks from my side of the family? So he went through this with two girls just so he didn't have to eat their clothes? Oh, that's a good point. I never thought about that. You're right. He probably did that. I like how he doesn't just eat her whole while she wore her shifts. This GS says the story is for the ugly guys. Ugly on the inside. Holly's House says this is a Dr. Phil episode, and it's a new favorite fairy tale. And that Cleopatra used to bathe in milk. It's supposed to maintain youthfulness. Yeah, but I don't know if that's the significance for Nordic stories. Like, there's quite a bit of distance between those two people and time. Holly's House says the lye represents cleansing and the milk restoration. Yeah, I was thinking about that because lye was a way of getting things clean. You would wash in water that went through ashes. They didn't quite know why at first, but it's because there's lye. And modern day soap still has lye. And if you mix lye, well, not all soaps, but a lot of traditional soap does. It's lye and fat. So it's entirely possible that that's the symbolism, using lye as a cleansing thing. GS speaking, I think, to the healing people and had to live in the woods because they were outcasts. Yeah, because without getting too much into it, one theory is that the notion of the crazy witch out in the woods and whatever else, and don't trust them and stuff, is because they were people that held that the sort of very orthodox traditional church teachings that God would cure all your ills if you just prayed, or maybe you've upset the Lord. Like, that was kind of the viewpoint. They didn't really agree with that, right? They had a medicine view of things. And in a lot of communities, that was heretical. To be like, here, crushed up some herbs, smoke this, whatever else. And of course, some of it was kind of wild and psychoactive. And, you know, not all of it worked, but it definitely worked better than, like, doing more penance if you had, like, a cold. But, yeah, there's also a theory that I read that I found very interesting, which is a lot of the mythology around witches was basically outcast lesbian women that lived in the wood. That was what a coven was a group of women that just were not interested in men and were kind of outcast for it. And so they just lived together out in the woods because that's how they would have survived and been free. And I really like that version of where that side of the tale came from because I just think that's fascinating. And Holly's House says, which I think is what the best comment, which we're going to close on here, is I demand a live-action movie directed by Guillermo del Toro immediately about the Lindworm. Yeah, so here's the thing that stuck out for me when I read both of these stories, East of the Sun and West of the Moon, and this one. And by the way, East of the Sun and West of the Moon, I didn't mention it, but obviously Beauty and the Beast belongs to the same genetic strand of story. It's a very Beauty and the Beast story in its origins, but it puts quite a bit more on the woman. In both of these stories, that is the case, that a woman saves the day, usually doing a lot of labor, unfortunately for men, not so much their own needs, other than to need a man. So like I said, it's not exactly feminist literature here, but it is worth pointing out that that kind of stuff doesn't happen in tales the further south you go. So up here in the high north, you see more and more princesses saving princes. We talked about that last week, but we saw that again this week. Anyways, I'm rambling now. I look forward to that Guillermo del Toro movie. I think you're right that that's the right person to do it. Anyways, this has... we'll send Guillermo your stream link. Yeah, I'm sure that's what he wants to do with his evening. I really appreciate everybody coming by, everybody who sat around and listened to me tell stories tonight. I'm sorry for some of the delays and technical stuff that happened there. And I hope you all have a really wonderful evening and get a good sleep. I'll keep the fire going. Thank you very much, and I will see you on Thursday at 6:30. Take care of yourselves.